Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios, it's time for Women in Motion. Brought to you by WBEC West. Join forces, succeed together. Now, here's your host.
Lee Kantor here, another episode of Women in Motion, and this is going to be a good one. But before we get started, it's important to recognize our sponsor, WBEC West. Without them, we couldn't be sharing these important stories. Today on Women in Motion, we have Karen Posey, who is the CEO and managing partner of KP Strategies. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, I am so excited to learn what you're up to. Tell us about KP Strategies. How are you serving folks?
Yes, I work with mid-market CEOs, helping them drive growth. And I do that through a lot of strategic planning, business planning, as well as helping them do the 6 things that only they, the CEO, can do.
Now, what's your backstory? Have you always been involved in this line of work?
I've had my business for 8 years. And then prior to that, I worked for a previous management consulting firm. In my last corporate role, I was vice president of strategy and consumer experience for a $12 billion payer. So have had a lot of experience working with Fortune 500 companies when I was in a previous management consulting role. And I've just spent a lot of time. I've run my own wound care company as a CEO and turned around an IT infrastructure company. So had a lot of experience kind of in that role of either starting businesses from scratch or turning around businesses. So this was just a natural progression for me to start my own business 8 years ago and to really work with CEOs, helping them solve the biggest challenges they face, because there's so much that gets in the way of them driving growth.
Now, when you began your career, are you coming at this from an operations side, a sales side, a management side? Like, what is kind of the lens of business, that you started out with?
Yeah, great question. I started out in sales and sales leadership. So I was in a sales role for probably 3 years, and then I moved into leadership and never looked back. So I was in sales for the first 20 years of my career, and then was a general manager of an IT infrastructure company. And that's really where I honed my operations skills. So I would say that, my real strength, although I certainly understand sales and can help organizations, it's really helping them drive growth through not only strategies that they use, but also I'm very strong in the operations side.
So now that you work with so many organizations, are you seeing common threads that CEOs, maybe mistakes that they're making?
Yeah. That's why I talk a lot about the 6 things that only a CEO can do. I think, it's so hard, and especially in the middle market. So when I define middle market, I'm really talking about CEOs. Google's definition is 10 million to $1 billion. That's a pretty big range, but I tend to work, my sweet spot is between 30 million and 300 million. And I would tell you, based on those CEOs, typically what got them where they are today isn't going to help them get to the next level, right? And so, a lot of them, by the time my business is heavy referral, and by the time I'm referred to them, they're typically frustrated, they're stuck. They're really struggling. Being a CEO is a lonely job. Matter of fact, loneliness, CEOs that are lonely, 61% of them say that it affects their performance. That's a McKinsey stat, by the way, but it's real. And so, really helping these CEOs really overcome what's getting in the way of growth for the company. A lot of times I find it's the first team, what I call their first team, which is their senior leadership team. But it also can be, sometimes it's that they're growing. I'm working with one CEO right now. They're growing so rapidly that actually their operations hasn't been able to keep up. And so I've really been doing a deep dive with operations, and I did a level of discovery first with employees and key stakeholders to really know where we needed to focus. But I'm really helping them scale up their operations because it was woefully behind.
Now, you've mentioned a couple times these 6 things that only a CEO can do. Do you mind sharing those 6 things?
Happy to share it. I talk about it all the time. So first and foremost is vision clarity. And what I mean by vision clarity, it's one thing to have a vision. And vision should be at least 10 years out. And I think even with the vision, I think CEOs struggle. A lot of times when I first start working with them, their vision is that, hey, they want to be the premier this or the best this or number one that. And what I really work with them on is I help them go to the future to see the future and make sure they have the insight they need to really come up with the right vision. Because, let's put it this way. If Netflix would have said that they wanted to be 20 years ago the number one DVD company in America, where would they be today, right? Thank goodness Reed Hastings, their former CEO, really was able to dream out 20 years and had an amazing vision for the company that they're fulfilling today. But that's the vision piece. The vision, the clarity piece comes into once you have a great vision, does everyone in the organization know what it is? And honestly, 78% of employees feel like their leaders don't have a clear direction for the company. Well, I would argue a lot of them, they have a clear direction. They might have a great vision and strategic priorities and core values. The problem is they don't have vision clarity. All the employees from entry level up don't know what they are. I mean, I find that all the time. And that's a big problem. And if you have vision clarity, here's why that matters. I just did a keynote last week in Atlanta in front of 120 high-tech CEOs at the Best of Breed conference. And I talked a little bit about vision clarity. But when you have vision clarity, companies that have that have 58% greater revenue, 32% higher profits, as well as their employee engagement is 16x, and they retain customers 2-to-1. It's incredible, the difference.
It's because everybody knows what the true north is. If they buy into the true north, then every activity they're doing is towards that end. But if there isn't clarity, you're missing slightly, and that just, compounds.
100%. So vision clarity is first and foremost. And these don't have to be in order, but vision clarity, what I call your first team, which is your senior leadership team. And this is the reason I call it the first team is this is another area where CEOs really struggle. It's because they have a senior leadership team, but they don't work as what I call a first team. In other words, they all lead functional areas. So for example, if you're CFO, Chief Marketing Officer, CMO, you have functional teams you're responsible for, but the first team should be your priority. And they should be working on the biggest challenges the company faces. And a lot of times they're not doing that. And so I really work with the CEO, helping them on the team composition, team practices, and really their operating rhythm, because if they get that down and they have their priorities, and if they're fortunate enough to all be in the same location, which is rare these days, but they even need to sit together, because that first team should absolutely be their top priority to solving the biggest challenges the company faces today, right?
Now, does that activity, let me interrupt you for 1 second, that activity, so you're the senior leadership team, you have a first team, but each of your reports has a first team, and that should trickle down. These same best practices should work throughout the whole entire organization, right?
Well, to clarify, the first team is the folks that report directly to the CEO. That's really what I call the first team. And it shouldn't necessarily trickle down. The whole point of the first team is that they truly are focused on the biggest challenges that the company faces and that they can work effectively together and with the CEO. That's really the key. Their functional group. So for example, if you're the CFO, their functional group might be finance. And yes, they're responsible for finance, but that truly is their second priority. Their first priority is to that senior leadership team or that first team and the CEO. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So your first team are they're the main drivers of change in the organization. That's where the leadership is taking place.
Yeah, well, and the leadership should be trickling down to all leaders in the organization. But yes, this is the first team are the key, what I call linchpins for driving change in the organization. Because if they haven't bought into the vision, if they haven't bought into the core values, if they haven't bought into the strategic priorities, and they're not also communicating that throughout the organization, then you don't have vision clarity, right? So the CEO needs to do it, but so does the first team.
Right. So they're all singing from the same song sheet.
100%. So the first division clarity, the second is first team. The third is really engaging stakeholders out there. So the CEO is responsible for those key stakeholders in the industry, making sure they know who your company is. They spend time with key opinion leaders so that they're not only involved and they keep up with what the industry trends are and the biggest movers and shakers, but those movers and shakers, those key opinion leaders also know what your organization does. So important. The fourth, is strategic organizational alignment. So that is culture, it's talent, and it's organizational design. And that's very important. And, so many organizations struggle today with culture just because there's, a lot of them are so spread out. So culture plays a big role. And even when we talk about talent, the CEO isn't responsible for all talent. In the mid-market, they should have a vice president or chief human resource officer or VP of HR that's responsible for talent. But where the CEO is responsible is for the highest value roles in the organization. So strategic organizational design really focuses on talent, culture, and organizational design, which is so important. So that's the fourth. The fifth is having an effective board. It's interesting. There's a stat out there from PwC recently that 70% of CEOs rate their boards as poor. Oh my gosh, 70%. And so there's a big opportunity really looking at what does an effective board look like. So there's a lot to be said there. So that's the fifth. And the final is personal effectiveness. And I leave that as last because I spend a lot of time with CEOs also on their personal effectiveness. So in other words, they need to know themselves. What gives them energy? What depletes their energy? The things that deplete their energy, they need to be giving those tasks to others in the organization. They need to be focused on those high energy, high value things. And they need to surround themselves with people in the organization that is protecting their time. The other thing is under personal effectiveness is really understanding their leadership model and perspective. So in other words, thinking about what do they stand for? What won't they tolerate? What's the legacy they want to leave for their organization, right? So that's leadership perspective. And it's important that people, their leaders, their first team specifically, understand that about them. And then the third, under personal effectiveness, is their brand. And the brand is so important for a CEO to stay humble, show gratitude, and really understand who they are and what they're portraying is vitally important.
Now you mentioned that 70% of CEOs think their board's ineffective. Doesn't that speak to their own personal effectiveness?
Some of it does. Honestly, I find it's interesting. CEOs, when they first take over the role, they think that if they have a board, that they're going to need to spend 10% of their time or some time with the board. But I will tell you, that is the biggest thing that is I wouldn't say the biggest, it's one of the biggest eye openers for CEOs. The board really takes on average about 25% of their time. And they've really got to work that board and help the board understand their role versus the role of the CEO and the first team. Because also there's another stat, a follow-up stat to the 70%, is that 40% of board members are confused on their role versus the role of the CEO and their first team. So there's a lot of reasons for dysfunction. It can happen just, not having board members that aren't engaged. They're not focused on the right objectives, not having clear charter, not having clear processes. There's a lot of reasons that can happen, but the CEO needs to really devote time to making sure they have the right board members and that they're really helping them, guide them on the strategy, not developing the strategy, not involved in the strategic plan, but helping them, just guiding them on the strategy. And the other big part of the board, quite frankly, is hiring and succession planning for the CEO.
Right. Well, that's what's surprising to me, because isn't the board the one that hires the CEO? And if they're not on the same page at go, I mean, neither one of them are doing their job.
Yes. And you know what tends to happen, honestly? It happens over time. It's not like it happens overnight. You get board members sometimes that have been on there for a long time. They're not engaged anymore. You also find that a lot of times when I first start working with the CEO, their board is just a reporting board, right? So getting that right structure and the right board members is so important.
Now, does sometimes the board hire you to kind of fix the CEO, or is this something that the CEO is saying, look, we're struggling here, and the board is part of the problem?
Yeah, I would say most of the time it is the CEO that is engaging me, but I have been engaged twice now by board members saying, hey, we'd love your help. We're not confident in the direction of the organization. We'd like you to come in and help them with their strategic plan, and let's really look at their yearly operations plan, and let's make sure we've got the right vision for the company. So yeah.
So now, a lot of the listeners here are aspiring mid-market companies, but maybe they're a little smaller. Is there any kind of advice or low-hanging fruit you can give to an aspiring mid-market organization in order for them to get to a new level?
Yes, there's lots of great tools. If you're a $3 to $5 million organization, and you're trying to get a strategic plan done, go out. EOS is a tremendous program. It's really perfect for companies under 50 employees. Leverage that program. Think about your vision. Really, some of these principles of the 6 things that work for mid-market companies would work for smaller companies. The ones that would specifically work for smaller organizations is definitely get your vision down, get your vision clarity down, make sure everybody in the organization knows where you're going, what your strategic priorities are, and your core values. The second one would be work with your first team. Make sure that your senior leadership team, you've got the right team composition, you've got the right team practices and operating rhythm for that first team. So important. I would say also of the 6, focus on your own personal effectiveness. A lot of times I find with smaller organizations, I have kind of mentored startups over the years through the Entrepreneur Center. I'm originally from Ohio, so I worked with 2 of the entrepreneurial centers there and worked with a lot of startups. And the personal effectiveness of the CEO is vitally important. It's always important, but it's vitally important when you're smaller, because candidly, a lot of times it's the CEO that might be the roadblock to a lot of growth or expansion, because traditionally they know their widget, but they don't know how to grow a business. So, I always refer back to what investors say. They would rather have an amazing CEO and an amazing first team. So in other words, an amazing senior leadership team and a mediocre strategy versus an amazing strategy and a mediocre team. So that would be my advice for a smaller organization.
Now, what is kind of the pain that these middle market companies are having, where what are some of the leading indicators that, hey, maybe we do have a problem? Is it kind of plateauing sales? Is it maybe we're having a hard time hiring or keeping our people? Like, what are kind of some of the symptoms that maybe things are a little off?
Yeah, some of the symptoms are they're all rowing in different directions. Excuse me. The CEO is spending too much time, what I call in the business and not on the business, focused on more of the strategic aspects of the business. When I talk about the first team not working together, everybody's rowing in a different direction. They're really struggling with execution. That's a big piece. What other are the common things I see? I also see that, it's interesting. They're struggling with their first team. They've lost confidence in some of their first team members. And, that's their senior leadership team. I equate a first team like a family. Every family has a level of dysfunction. You love them, but they have a level of dysfunction. The first team's the same way. And making sure you really have a solid, high-performing first team is so important. And a lot of times when I first start working with the CEO, they think they've got a pretty strong first team. I get in there and I start working with them, and we uncover some things that help them realize that sometimes, and this is specifically in the middle market, what got them here isn't going to get them to the next level. And they have a lot of aspirations for growth. And sometimes they outgrow people. And that's hard. It's super hard. But they've got to be able to make those tough choices and make those bold decisions. So another thing I see a lot is CEOs lack that confidence to make the bold decisions because maybe they don't have good vision clarity. They haven't identified why it's happening, but they lose confidence in their decisions and they're afraid to make those bold moves. And I got to tell you, successful CEOs, the great CEOs, make bold moves early and they make them often because you have to. Otherwise, you're not going to, it's hard to compete. It's hard to grow. There's a lot of things pulling at a CEO every day.
Well, I would imagine that that's one of the really maybe an unintended benefit of working with an organization like yours, where you can kind of give them the confidence to make the bold move, and like you're kind of taking some of the heat as the bad guy instead of them. Like this is, maybe they're afraid, maybe it's some team member that's been around since the beginning and they're hesitant to, not punish, but kind of there's a loyalty there that is overriding maybe an effectiveness.
That well said. I think the other thing too is that, I talked about loneliness earlier. Loneliness, seriously, it's real. And being a CEO is a lonely job. There's things you can't talk to your first team about. You want to be close to them, but you also need to keep your distance. There are decisions you have to make that only you can make. You can't run a company by, a group decision. There are some big decisions that sometimes the CEO by themselves has to make. And that's where I also spend a lot of time. I really help the CEO. They call me and run those things by me, the things that they can't share with their first team because they need a coach to guide them on some of those big, bold decisions that they need to make. And they're hard.
Right.
So
and
that's a big role I play.
Right. And also it's kind of they can vet maybe the quote unquote dumb idea that might sound crazy, but it might be the one that needs to be made, and they might be hesitant to share that with everybody. You're a safer place for them to share.
Yeah. And the other thing they know for sure, here's the other challenge when the bigger your company gets, it happens, it's not intentional, but what happens is you start getting filtered information. The bigger you get, the more filtered the information is that you receive. Your first team sometimes tells you what you want to hear because it's in their best interest a lot of times to do that. So you really don't get a clear-eyed view of reality. And what I give to my CEOs is I tell them the truth. That's the only way I know how to work with them. That's why they're paying me. And that's the value I bring, is that their first team, even if they ran it by their first team might have told them it was a great idea.
Right.
And they share it with me, and I'm like, well, here's some things you might want to think about, right? Here's some holes I see in that. And they need someone that can be totally honest and transparent with them.
Now, why was it important for you to kind of become part of the WeBeck West community, and what were you kind of thinking when it was time to join?
I am originally from Ohio. I've only been out in Colorado here 3 years, and I actually had clients of mine that came to me and said, Karen, we are a part of, Women Business Enterprise National Council. You need to join. Here's the benefits. I looked into it and I'm like, wow, what an amazing organization. Well, when I moved to Colorado, one of the first things I did, because I didn't know anyone out here, is I made contact with Jamie Lomax and said, how can I get involved? I really want to get involved in WeBeck West and specifically in Colorado because I want to help. I'm very passionate about not only helping CEOs, but specifically female CEOs. I want to see all women rise. And so I was very fortunate that at the time there was an opening coming up in Colorado. This was 3 years ago. And I've been fortunate enough, and it's been my honor to be forum chair for We Back West here in Colorado. So it's been fantastic. I've met so many amazing people. What Pamela Williamson is doing for We Back West and the people she has aligned herself with and her board members, it's truly an honor to serve because I love where they're headed and the great things they're doing for women every day.
So who is that ideal middle market organization for you to work with? Do you have a niche in terms of industry, or are you kind of industry agnostic?
I'm industry agnostic, but I will tell you my background is healthcare, high-tech IT, and actually I do a lot for people that work with the government. So any government contractors, just coming from Ohio, I have a lot of background working with Air Force Research Labs, NASA, and whatnot. So, but I can work with all industries. But yeah, that's been my background.
And if somebody wants to learn more and connect with you or somebody on the team, what is the website? What is the best way to connect?
Thank you. Yes, it's www.kpstrategies.net.
All right. Well, Karen, thank you so much for sharing your story today. You're doing such important work, and we appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed my time today.
All right. This is Lee Kantor. We'll see you all next time on Women in Motion.